Trace your family line back far enough and you'll find a nameless woman crouched beside a dying fire, fighting cold, hunger, and the universe itself. She survived, and so did every woman between her and you. Not through luck, but through impossible endurance in eras designed to break them. Across centuries, women faced childbirth without medicine, marriages without choice, and rules that valued silence over survival. Even when freedom briefly appeared, it disappeared just as quickly. So let's dive into 10 moments in history where being born female wasn't just hard. It was a daily fight to stay alive. Number 10. Victorian Britain. Step into Britain between 1837 and 1901, and you'll notice the lace, the polished manners, the gas lamps, the novels, and the sweeping ballrooms. It looks romantic until you inhale. Industrial cities choked on coal smoke. Slums groaned under the weight of families stacked in one-room flats with rats for roommates, and tuberculosis as the unofficial tenant. For working-class women, life was a slow grind of 14-hour shifts, bleeding fingers, and wages legally owned by their husbands. Their clothes, corsets squeezing ribs like vices, restricted movement almost as much as society restricted ambition. Marriages were economic transactions. Divorce was nearly impossible unless you had enough money to bribe the court or enough scars to prove your suffering. Childbirth was a coin toss. Thousands died from infections caused by doctors who saw no need to wash their hands between patients. Even wealthy women lived velvet-lined prisons. They painted watercolors and played piano, but couldn't legally control property until late-century reforms nudged the needle forward. Still, Victorian women didn't bend quietly. Activists, writers, reformers, and organizers chipped cracks into the patriarchal stone. Cracks future generations would blast open. Number 9. Medieval India. Between the 10th and 15th centuries, widowhood could be a death sentence. The practices of sati and jauhar were romanticized as devotion and poetry, yet in reality were fueled by fear, pressure, and the politics of honor. Lose your husband, and your in-laws might encourage or force you onto his funeral pyre. Refuse, and whispers of shame could follow you forever. Accounts describe widows drugged, restrained, or pushed into the flames when voluntary devotion wasn't forthcoming. Jauhar was even more harrowing. When a fortress was doomed to fall, entire groups of women, queens, servants, girls, were expected to walk into mass fire pits to avoid enslavement or assault by invading armies. Chronicles of events like the Siege of Chittor describe thousands perishing in a single night, though numbers remain debated. Women who fled lived in constant fear. Women who stayed often faced a choice that wasn't a choice at all. Yet here too, some defied fate, escaping in disguise, seeking sanctuary in temples, or refusing rituals entirely. Their survival, though rare, is proof resistance existed even in the shadows. Number 8. The French Revolution's Reign of Terror. Paris, 1793. Wheels scrape the cobblestones, a cart approaches. Someone whispers your name. Under the Committee of Public Safety, a title that aged like spoiled wine, fear ruled every corner. Women who had once led salons, printed political arguments, and marched for bread suddenly found themselves declared enemies of the state. Leaders like Olympe de Gouges, who dared to publish the Declaration of the Rights of Woman, were rewarded not with debate, but with the guillotine. Your clothing had to strike a perfect balance. Too fine meant you were a royalist. Too plain meant you were a radical. Too outspoken meant you were doomed. Women were imprisoned for pamphlets, for gossip, for being related to someone the wrong faction disliked. Prisons overflowed with lice, rot, and death, serving as waiting rooms for the blade. Even after surviving the chopping block, women were politically erased. Women's clubs were banned. Organizing went underground. A revolution that promised equality delivered silence instead. Number 7. Francoist Spain. When Francisco Franco seized Spain in 1939, women were shoved backward in time. Independence was rewritten as immorality. Education for girls focused on obedience, housework, and proper femininity. Women couldn't open bank accounts, travel alone, or hold many jobs without a male guardian's approval. The women's section of the Phalange acted like state-sponsored morality police, inspecting homes, monitoring behavior, and punishing anyone who didn't fit the regime's vision. Those linked to the defeated Republican side faced imprisonment, torture, and even execution. Worse still, the regime stole approximately 31,000 children, placing them in loyal homes to erase their parents' influence. Women labeled morally fallen endured invasive virginity checks and re-education programs. Yet resistance simmered. Women smuggled messages, taught banned lessons, and kept underground networks alive. Their quiet defiance lit the first sparks that would later burn the dictatorship down. Number 6. The Salem Witch Trials. In 1692, Salem turned hysteria into a hobby. One accusation could collapse your life before you finished your morning chores. Spectral evidence, dreams, visions, or the wild claims of frightened children I needed was enough to drag a woman to court. Being opinionated, reclusive, financially independent, or simply disliked made you a target. Over 200 people were accused, with 19 hanged and one man crushed under stones because he refused to plead. Jails were freezing, overcrowded pits where women gave birth on cold floors. Babies began life in chains. Animals were even executed. It was a year where logic evaporated and paranoia ruled, leaving permanent scars long after the last gallows was taken down. Number 5. The European Witch Hunts. From the 15th to the 18th centuries, Europe turned misogyny into a legal system. The Malleus Maleficarum, a witch hunter's manual dripping with paranoia, gave judges a license to torture. Herbal healers, midwives, widows, spinsters, or anyone over 40 could be dragged into interrogations featuring thumbscrews, sleep deprivation, or being hoisted by ropes until shoulders tore from their sockets. Confession didn't save you, it merely changed how you died. Historians estimate 40,000 to 60,000 executions, with women making up the overwhelming majority. Trials spiraled into madness. In some regions, entire families were executed. In others, even the accusers eventually ended up on the chopping block. Knowledge, especially knowledge held by women, was treated as a pact with the devil. Number 4. Starvation as sanctity. In medieval Europe, holiness often meant hunger. Girls, some just barely past childhood, refused food for months or years, claiming divine visions and supernatural endurance. The church praised them as spiritual prodigies, even as their bodies collapsed under the strain. Some sought escape from forced marriages. Others were encouraged by religious leaders who equated suffering with purity. Convents sometimes enforced starvation as discipline, pushing new nuns into cycles that destroyed their health. Saint Catherine of Siena, revered for her piety, reportedly survived on almost nothing and died weighing shockingly little. Holiness had become a competition, and the winners were often those closest to death. Number 3. When medicine became a weapon. In the 19th century, doctors embraced a magical diagnosis: female hysteria. Any emotion, grief, frustration, defiance, ambition, could be pathologized. Husbands could commit wives to asylums with a signature. Once inside, women faced ice baths, restraints, forced feeding, and surgeries that mutilated reproductive organs in the name of cure. Wealthy women faced the rest cure, a nightmare of enforced bed rest, isolation, and sensory deprivation. Working-class women weren't spared. If you fainted in a factory, you might be dragged into an institution and put to unpaid labor in laundry rooms. Thousands were institutionalized, many never emerging again. Number 2. Jewish women in the Holocaust. Between 1941 and 1945, Jewish women faced annihilation mixed with targeted abuse. Cattle cars packed them so tightly they couldn't sit. Upon arrival, families were torn apart in minutes. The elderly, the sick, and pregnant women were sent straight to the gas chambers. Those chosen for labor endured starvation, disease, and torture. Nazi doctors performed barbaric medical experiments, infecting wounds, injecting chemicals, and mutilating reproductive organs. Sexual abuse was rampant. Some camps forced women into brothels where refusal was a death sentence. Yet even in hell, resistance flickered. Women smuggled food, hid children, forged documents, and in 1944, a group of women blew up part of Auschwitz's crematorium. A rebellion so dangerous it remains one of history's most astonishing acts of courage. Number 1. Japanese women in Manchuria, 1945. When the Soviet army stormed Manchuria at the end of World War II, Japanese civilians found themselves trapped in a lawless no-man's land. Violence exploded across towns. Looting was rampant. Girls and young women were seized or handed over by families hoping to spare others. Teenagers were forced into makeshift barracks to serve dozens of soldiers a day without food, medicine, or protection. Many died within weeks from injuries, infections, or despair. Survivors returned to Japan only to face silence, shame, and social exile. Many never spoke of it again. Some never made it home at all, absorbed into foreign countries whose languages they never learned. Only decades later did their stories finally begin emerging. Thanks for walking through the shadows of history with me. If this journey opened your eyes, made you think, or gave you a deeper respect for the women who came before us, make sure you hit that like and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next one.